Hi, everybody. I just wanted to give you a quick bit of info about some changes to Patreon and the way that they're going to be charging new subscribers. So this will only affect new subscribers who are signing up beyond November 1st, 2024. If you've already been signed up previous to then, don't even bother. Don't even worry about it. But if you're a new sign up, especially if you're an iOS user, an Apple device user, just don't sign up through Apple Pay. Don't sign up through the App Store, because if you do, they're going to charge you an extra 30% fee on top of the Patreon membership charges. I know it's a bummer. It's not my decision. It's not something that I support. It's maybe just kind of a greedy money grab from Apple and iOS, but if you want to avoid that 30% charge, just sign up on any other device. Sign up through your web browser, sign up through the website, sign up through any other means other than Apple Pay or iOS, and you don't have to get hit with that 30% extra charge. So thanks for all of your continued support, and I would love to see you sign up at patreon.com/RyanPBA, but just not through the Apple iOS App Store.
You're listening to the Piercing Wizard podcast, and I'm your host, Ryan Willett. I'm a professional body piercer with 20 years experience. I travel around the world teaching technique and safety classes, and I'm a member of the Association of Professional Piercers. Listen in as I talk to my friends and colleagues about our industry so we can all stay sharp.
Welcome back to the Piercing Wizard podcast, or if this is your first time joining me, welcome to the show. This will be a special longer form episode. You can find the audio version wherever you listen to your podcasts, but you can also watch a video version by subscribing to my Patreon page on any tier. So Shawn Porter, it's difficult to describe someone like Shawn. I'll leave it up to him to describe it in detail, but I think in broad strokes, I might describe Shawn as an archivist, as a facilitator, someone who's been really important, a creative and dynamic force within the body modification world over several decades. I first met Shawn through BME Zine, through that community, and then later on the Scar Wars scarification events that he facilitated, massively important for the growth of scarification in a lot of practitioners, myself included. Today, you might know Shawn Porter's work through Sacred Debris, a lot of the archiving and the historian work, all the different things that he's sharing on there, and through some of his printed books. But I thought that we would get into kind of this longer conversation about how Shawn got into the body modification world, and BME Zine, and ModCon, Scar Wars, and then Sacred Debris, and all the things that he's doing now. So it's a really fascinating conversation. I'm going to give you a bit of a trigger warning, though, if you're uncomfortable with terms like cock, as an example, or a lot of talk about heavy genital modification work, body modification work, a lot of stuff about below the waist. If you're not comfortable with that stuff, this is probably not going to be the episode for you. But if you're interested in it, even if you're just morbidly curious about some of this stuff, welcome to the episode. This will be a pretty fun one. Let's go ahead and get into this conversation with Shawn Porter.
Okay. So you can hear me, I can hear you. So it looks like the microphone's not going to work. So hopefully there won't be too much like background noise.
Oh, no, it's fine. Zoom is really good for like cutting out background audio and reverb and all that junk.
Okay. You're good. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, Julia.
Hi, Ryan.
Hi.
You hit a certain point, and for me, I'd like to say it was 50, but it was long before that where this stuff just doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah. I feel like TikTok was the generation that did that for me. Like I tried, but I don't think I can keep up with it, really. It goes so fast.
For me, it was Snapchat.
Snapchat, yeah.
I mean, realistically, you look at what I've been doing for 30 years, and it's saving every message, every photograph, and you have an app that the entire purpose of is that you don't save anything.
Yeah.
I conceptually couldn't figure it out. I physically couldn't figure it out. After that, I just mostly asked her to help me with stuff.
Yeah. The whole app like was a little bit lost to me, because it's like, yeah, but I can like read a message and then look away and then look back, and I've already forgotten what the message said. So it's like, if it's gone that fast, like, let's just not talk there.
Yeah. And I understand that the kids are using it to like flash their titties and stuff, but like,
Sure.
And I get it, but just, I still have floppy disks from AOL.
Yeah.
Right. Like old photos of Garza from like 93, like the idea of something just
with the metal eyebrows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The full metal eyebrows. How's it going, young man?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm not so good, but we're gonna get through it.
Yeah, I had a memorial service for a friend who passed away earlier today, so it was like, yeah, I'm gonna cheer up and ask questions, and yeah.
If you want to, I'm completely free tomorrow. If you want a mental health day, dude.
No, it's fine. Like, I don't have mental health, so it's okay. I don't need days for them.
Same. I physical health. I impaled my foot, and it is bleeding again
Yeah.
because they chose not to suture it. So
Uh,
I'm feeling it,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's the irony of like I was unhealthy, so I lost a bunch of weight. I lost a bunch of weight by running, and now running is trying to take me out.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
like you just feel like you kind of can't win.
It's also kind of funny that like a boo-boo on your foot is what takes you out at this point when it's like some of the stuff that I want to talk to you about with this is also like
Grievous
heavy
bodily
ball
harm.
stuff and all that like the things that don't phase someone in their 20s or 30s and like by the time you cross 40 it's like no I couldn't possibly.
Even I don't know if you're recording, right?
Yeah. But I
Okay.
can also snip anything you don't
No,
want
no,
about it.
no. This is something that's been coming up a lot lately. So, I think, did you sit in? You sat in for one of the ModCon lectures, right? In Berlin.
Yeah, the second one.
Yeah. So, Faulkner, I had Alan Faulkner record that little video for me, and that's something that he touches upon, where he's like, this extreme stuff we used to do, it used to seem so normal, and
Yeah.
trying to explain to people who aren't us why there's a photo of me throwing the devil horns with somebody's skin wrapped around it while half
Yeah.
of it was still on their body.
Yeah.
As a 50-year-old dude who doesn't really cross paths with modification work being done as much anymore,
Hmm.
that's not normal. It's funny.
Yeah,
It's funny
some of the
100%
things
of the
that you can
time.
find, some of the things that you can find mundane over the course of a life and a career. Like I've had conversations with people about guiche piercings recently, and talking about like the intricacies of like watching someone's butthole pucker in a certain way, or like the draping of their balls, and how you just say it like you're ordering a sandwich, but it's not normal to most people.
And like I love everything I was involved in. I'm really thankful that I'm not physically doing most of that stuff anymore.
Yeah,
There's no stress in looking at photos of the stuff we did. There was the constant stress of the police being called, the somebody having a really bad experience, and I mean, I was too young to like think of the ethical ramifications of somebody having a really bad experience.
yeah. Um, that's one of those things where I feel bad for generations that have gotten into this in the last like 5 years or so. And like I've seen lots of piercers get into it, and it's like you have the easiest job in a lot of ways. But I've also seen a couple of people like nibbling around the edges of like harder, heavier mod work. And it's like it must be so impossible for them because of legalities and restriction of materials, and nobody wants to talk to anybody about the stuff they've done in the past because of like legal liabilities.
Well, I was talking to my wife last night. We were coming back from seeing Terrifier Part 3,
Oh,
Art the
Lola
Clown.
had me watch that on Amazon. Not a fan.
Not, I mean, they're not good. They're juvenile as hell. But we were just talking about like extremity and all that. We were talking about Carolina Biological Supply. They sold to universities and schools, and it turned out private individuals back in the 90s, and you could call them up and just order anthrax. You could call them up and order, and they were supposed to not send you anthrax samples, but we were getting formaldehyde by the gallon. We got all of our hypodermic tips because the concept of this little rural North Carolina biological supply company, they couldn't think of a bad reason to buy 300 hypodermic tips.
Right.
So they had no policy against selling you 300 hypodermic tips or selling you a gallon of formaldehyde or selling you whatever. And it was like, now, man, I don't even know where to get certain things. BME.
People ask me for like dermal punch stuff was nothing in like that 2000 to 2005 realm. Would just be like just like doing a nostril piercing today. It's like, yeah, you want to get your conscious punched at 00 gauge? Sure, come on back. And now it's like I don't even know where I would get biopsy punches anymore.
I mean, and that's probably good, right?
Yeah.
It's probably good that the free reign to this stuff that we had is not as free as it used to be, because the idea being now that the people using it will hopefully have to go through that hero's journey.
Mm,
Not to get too Joseph Campbell, like we no nobody under a certain age will understand what it's like to take a roll of 35 millimeter film of a castration into a Walgreens.
yeah.
And it wasn't the castration that would really freak you out. It was, what if the dude at Walgreens calls the cops?
Yeah.
And you're sitting there waiting in your car, like, yeah, either I'm getting double prints or I'm going to jail.
Yeah.
That's in my future right now. Yeah, I love digital cameras. I love not having to have that preamble every time you go into the photo mat. Like, so listen, everyone's over 21, everyone's consenting, and they're like,
Yeah.
take
Here are
it.
photocopies of their IDs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, I
So
don't.
that sparks a question for me actually. And also I'm going to get my little notebook because I wrote down a few other little questions too. But um, how early on in your life did you feel like you were starting to become an archiver, or were you just naturally like a pack rat from a young age?
Yeah. So collector, collector of collections. So even as a really little kid, I collected action figures, I collected comic books, I collected VHS tapes, I collected rocks. Just like the object permanence of having a thing was very important to me. And I was sick a lot when I was a really little kid, and I read compulsively. I had books, just stacks of books, and I knew I wanted tattooed, and I wanted my ears pierced. So anytime I would see a newspaper article, anytime I would see a magazine, I would check out books in the library that I'd never return. Just because I wanted to have that, I wanted to be able to refer to it.
Yeah.
And when I met my mentor, Jack Yunt, who was a piercer and modification artist, who mostly worked on older people. When I first met him, there was that transition that was happening. He saw in me and my brother the obsessive need to amass,
Yeah.
and he was very much the same way. He kept all of his magazines in binders. He kept all of his videotapes very meticulously laid out, and photographs. And he kind of got me on the path to, it's one thing for this stuff to be going on, but if we don't archive it, if we don't, like if we don't ask questions, the context won't be there. And
Yeah.
it took me years to really fully form that in my head. But I think 93 was the first time I tried to like put it in a format other than just photos in my house, right?
Yeah.
I started a little photocopied zine. I was a very big zine kid. I still have a lot. It's ironic. I don't have any of my own zines, but I have zines that I bought in that time period.
Hmm.
The idea of, I grew up on a cattle farm, an orange grove and cattle farm in Central Florida. The idea of a world outside of that, I mean, some of the zines back then, Ryan, were just people talking about what they did that day.
Yeah.
But it's like what they did that day in the Pacific Northwest, or what they did that day in France. And the idea of having these little windows into people's lives is very much influenced that first Sacred Debris zine, where it was like, these are the business cards I collected from tattoo shops. When I was too young to really go into most tattoo shops, I would send them stamped self-addressed envelopes to get their business cards back, and it was cool that I had them, but what if you wanted to see them, you
Yeah.
know? And the web it existed, but it was harder to access then.
Hmm.
You had to pay by the minute for AOL and all that. You had to buy a computer, which was terribly expensive. So zines were the primary way that I was able to first start taking the material I had been collecting and put a narrative with it.
I think like I really like going to Paul King's classes about history, especially prior to the 1980s.
Mhm.
And it almost feels like if you have to create like a Venn diagram in a way, there'd be like that whole like pen pals era, and then
Sure.
this internet era. And then I think like zines and stuff was kind of the Venn diagram in the middle of like the bridge from one generation to like the digital generation.
Yeah, and I think that those guys like Ken Shine, who did Ball Club Quarterly, like the Enigma guys at Chicago, like those guys were old dudes. They didn't think of it as a zine. JD, I'm writing a lecture for next year about queer tattoo artists that aren't Cliff Raven, right? Like everyone, when you talk about gay tattooers, like, yeah, Cliff Raven. It's like, well, that's one.
Yeah.
And JD, John Dagion, published trucker porn, and these were like photocopied, stapled together. But I don't think they knew they were part of a bigger phenomenon.
Mm.
They just knew that they had to get that material out there. And the pen pal stuff has been of particular interest. There was I think a pen pals article in the last Nodal Points, and it popped up quite a bit in the ModCon lecture as well, just because it was that taking people who didn't know that there were other people like them and being able to connect them globally for the price of a postage stamp and a membership to the groups.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty. It's interesting to see physical history in a way, because sometimes you go to a lecture and it's like these things that have been passed verbally from one person to another, or maybe something that was written down in like a personal sense, but seeing the things that were put out there is just like, look at this thing I can do with my dick. And it's like
Yeah.
really interesting to see the way that people present stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the stories that I repeat to the point of comedy is, Jay's story of a sub-incision from the ModCon book. Jay didn't know about the body modification community. He loved playing with his urethra. So the obvious thing is, if you like playing with your urethra, keep making it bigger.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't really have much cross-cultural inspiration. He just kept cutting. He just kept cutting, cutting, cutting. He gets a full sub-incision. I think that it's fair to say that Jay's sub-incision launched 1,000 dick splittings. I mean, he had just such a perfect sub. When he found out you could pierce your dick, he thought it was the most novel thing he had ever heard. He's like, you can put earrings in it. And it was
Yeah.
this mind-blowing thing that, like, he was able to connect with other people because he thought he had invented that wheel. And the Incredible Till, who we talked about in
Yeah.
in the ModCon class and all that. Like, here's a guy who in the 1920s just started, I'm going to start piercing myself. I'm going to start doing all these things. And each person had to invent it from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
We have this one diagram from Jack Yunt's archives, and the story that was told to us that came from some sort of medical, like a military field manual on various ways that you can split your dick. 100% that's not the case. I've never
Yeah.
found literally any other proof of that. It was probably something from a gay fetish site or
Mm-hmm.
magazine or something, and it was probably told to him, oh, this came from a field medic. So
Yeah.
it's not like, they would talk about certain modifications in modern primitives, but as free as modern primitive, or not modern primitives, I'm sorry, National Geographic,
Yeah.
as free as they were to show some indigenous tribal modifications, they really weren't showing sub-incisions. So
Right.
most of these guys had this just innate need to do it. And Jay, the sub-incision guy, he called himself a phallic narcissist. He loved his dick. He used to send me these videotapes of him just talking to it. When he'd be masturbating, he would be talking to his dick. He was a phallic narcissist, and
Yeah.
the idea of him being able to show that off to people was as hot to him as having it.
Mm.
Like, he wanted
It's
you to
it's
know he had it.
it's interesting to see where people's kind of sheltered existence becomes this like shared existence. Does that make sense? Like, the things that they're doing privately, and then they're like, oh man, people have to know how I can turn my dick inside out. And it's like, I got to show people, and then maybe they'll want to turn their dick inside out.
Yeah, I mean, and you have these guys who, in my portion of the Till photos is, over 100 photos, and he was not a guy who could really afford much in the way of technology, but man, when he got that Polaroid, he had to send those letters out.
Yeah.
Every person he could connect with. I saw him on my earliest membership packet for Unique. I saw him in it, and it was like, we'll trade photos. And so it's not enough to say you have it. It is letting other people see that you have it,
Yeah.
maybe them finding it hot too. And, a lot of, and I'm going to say certain words tonight that come with a loaded connotation, like pathos.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these guys had a pathos to their thing, to the point of, there was a gentleman who was a eunuch castration fetishist, and I would post a photo on Sacred of just like somebody's scrotum piercing, and he would send me a message like, do you think that as he exposed his testicles like that, he was thinking what would happen if somebody came up and just took them off? And it's like, nah, man, I don't think he thought that. But it was impossible for this guy to see a scrotum and not project his fantasy of surprise emasculation onto it, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of these guys had a pathology that bordered on obsession. a self amputee who used to all the tables or all the chairs in his kitchen dining room table were wheelchairs. He collected comic books, but only things with Aquaman after he lost his arm.
Okay.
Like obsession to the point of
Yeah. Where it's all consuming.
all consuming. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, finding other people who could co-sign that,
Mm.
that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And whether that was through the postal groups, whether that was through personal ads in fetish magazines, whether that was eventually through, Shannon and I kind of democratized that by making it free. And I forget, I want to say I paid like $40 a year for Unique.
Yeah.
And that was just to get in the personals. And then you would have to add $1 with every letter you sent out. And that new, I think would come out a couple of times a quarter. And when that new one came, you go to the bottom and see the new entries that had come in and send as many letters, hedge your bets and see who would respond. Just it was that need to connect with other people who shared your particular thing. And one of the things that I tried to really emphasize in the ModCon talk is that pre-BME, pre-SPC, pre-BME Extreme, these groups were very segregated. The umbrella concept of body modification community wasn't a thing. So
Yeah.
the amputee guys may have a tattoo, may have a piercing, just like your plumber may have had a tattoo or piercing, but they were amputee guys. The
Yeah.
castration guys were castration guys. And I say guys because predominantly the people who were doing this stuff were cis, older, gay white men.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say the ones that were documented
Yeah.
were cis white gay men. We would never, as I've gotten older, saying anything was the first has gone, did John Cobb do the first uvula piercing, or did he do the first documented
Yeah.
piercing?
Yeah.
Was the community of body modification primarily cis white gay males? No, the documented
Yeah.
majority were gay white cis males. So yeah, like these guys were just, I don't know. I mean, somebody asked me at work today if I was a fan of the Birds, and I didn't realize that meant the Philadelphia Eagles.
Okay.
And I remember collecting these people when I was a teenager in my head, like sports people, like, oh man, I met a eunuch today. Oh man, I met an amputee today,
Yeah.
at 15, 16, feeling so cool that like I knew somebody who did that.
So was that how you got connected with Jack Yunt? Was through like the pen pals world?
No, so my parents were super super tolerant of me wanting to get tattooed, and they used to sign. They would call shops up and say, hey, my son wants to get a tattoo. We would sometimes lie up and say I was 17. I just didn't have a learner's permit yet.
Yeah.
When I was 15, and I got a couple of tattoos, and by that point I had, earring gun pierced ears and earring gun pierced nostril. When I was 15, I found out that Bud Pearson at Ancient Art in Orlando, he had been tattooing me. I found out that he did nipple piercing. So I asked him, I said, hey, Bud, I know I'm young, but will you pierce my nipple? And he said, yeah, I do piercings, but I prefer it to be on women. He was a kind of horny old man, straight dude. And he's like, but there's this guy who lives closer to you than I am. His name is Jack. He's one of my favorite clients. He does piercing. And if you want, the next time you guys both make an appointment, I'll just do it on the same day, can meet this guy. And if he feels comfortable piercing you at 15, that's between him and your parents.
Yeah.
And I met him, and he was this, sorry about that.
That's right.
He was this cotton-haired, sweet old man with, I think he was wearing double-aught nipple rings and half-inch holes, and he was getting his kneecap tattooed. And he was wearing a thong that just looked like he was smuggling a 2-liter Coke bottle.
Yeah.
And my parents, my Southern religious parents, were so sweet. They had no idea. Like, they thought he was just and he was the nicest old man. But, my mom used to not know Liberace was gay.
Okay.
So she
It's subtle. It's subtle.
Yeah. And Jack was one of those guys, like, one conversation with him.
Yeah.
Pretty much cemented it. The first time we went to his house to get pierced, which was like maybe about a week after we had that shared tattoo appointment, every piece of art in his house had a cock on it. every
Hmm.
single one. And it wasn't just a cock; it was just a egregiously large cock. And my mom's looking around. She's like, he really likes male artwork. I'm like, yeah, mom, he does. So, a couple of months after that first appointment, we didn't have to have them come up anymore. And I just remember me saying something about Jack being gay, and she's like, no, well, he said he has his children. It's like, uh-huh, yeah.
Hmm.
He also has, 100 different cocks in his living room, mom. Like, and she, yeah, no, it took a lot of convincing. So one time he came over because he used to come over to visit her. They were closer in age, and my brother and I were just two rambunctious kids, and I'd wake up and hear Jack in my kitchen having coffee with my mom. And she finally asked him, she's like, so you're like, you have kids? And he's like, like a lot of men in my generation, things weren't really, as easy as they are now. So, and that certainly, as a gay man myself who's married to Julia, who you've met, it certainly let me know that I could be gay and have a wife,
Yeah.
and that it's not weird, and that it's not, I don't have to reclassify the way that I talk about my sexuality. It's, I'm a gay guy who
Hmm.
just happens to really, really love my wife and other dudes and other ladies. And, and that's what Jack was. Jack was a mentor, not just about piercing and modification stuff. Jack would like teach us about music, and he would teach us about gardening, and he would teach us about, he loved classic cars. And, not that I was ever the most butch kid, but, like going out when he was like working on his car was like the coolest I felt as, a 15-year-old kid, like I know how to change a spark plug now kind of thing.
That's kind of a cool relationship because it's got to be at an age where you're trying to figure out a lot of different things about why do I like these certain things? I'm not sure why yet. And to find somebody who is like, a piercing mentor in a lot of other different ways, like as you're kind of discovering body piercing and finding somebody who's like already started to become a pioneer with that.
Yeah.
Um, how did
And
it, how fast did it spiral from what you would see as like more of a mundane piercing, like I want to get my nipple pierced, which isn't really, mundane, but like, going from that to the much heavier stuff. Like what was the transition like along the way? Do you remember like chapters in that?
sure, it was about a week.
Okay.
Once I had my nipple pierced, I just, I'd said, hey, like, what's your comfort level on doing a Prince Albert on me? And it's something that I've talked about quite a bit. Is other than the obvious red flags, there were no red flags.
Hmm.
Should a 65-year-old man have been piercing a 15-year-old boy's PA? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It is a red flag, but it is one of those time and place things that it just wasn't weird. There was never any overt sexual, other than the holistic sexuality of all the erotic art and all this. Everything at Jack's house was completely appropriate, other than being wildly inappropriate.
Sure.
He never put me in an uncomfortable situation. There was never anything creepy happening. And he was like, let's not bring your mom and dad up for this one, you know,
Mm.
and just because, that you don't need to see that. And he made sure that they were okay with it. He gave a phone call to my mom. He's like, yeah, your son wants this piercing called a Prince Albert. And she's like, yeah, I know my kids are weird. After that, I think would have been nipple, Prince Albert, other nipple. And then when I turned 16, I think we did the Ampelang,
Okay.
which lasted about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Not for me. Don't know if you've ever had one.
Nope.
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 Okay. It's
Don't
okay
have
not
one,
to have
don't
one.
want one.
It's heavy, man. And most 16-year-old boys have never seen blood squirt out of their penis like a squirt gun.
Hmm.
That was when I took the gauze off, and I knew
Yeah.
as soon as I took the gauze off, not keeping this one. Kept it about
Yeah.
a week.
Yeah.
So yeah, around 16, I had a journal entry from when I was younger where I had drawn the underside of my penis, and was talking about the seam from the tip of the urethra to the bottom of the via the glands, and talking about like opening it up. And I didn't know there was a name for it. And then the first modified penis I saw was Carl Carroll in Modern Primitives, and I knew I didn't want that, obviously. And by that point, but by the time I started getting the genital work done, which was very early in my relationship with Jack, he showed me what he had going on, which was the full subincision, the split glands, the silicone, and all that. And I just said, hey man, like when I turn 18, would you be comfortable doing this on me? And he's kind of like, how about I do it on you when you want it?
Yeah.
And if that's tomorrow, that's tomorrow. If that's 2 years from now or 5 years from now, like you be in charge of when you think you're ready. And I waited a while. I stretched my PA up to half inch over the next year or so, and we were lucky to have Silver Anchor, of which Jack was a partner with Ed Fenster. So on our way up to Jack's house, we could just stop by, talk to Ed, pack orders. Jack pretty quickly extended his discount at Silver Anchor. So we were buying, you've been piercing since what, 90?
96, 97 ish.
You remember how expensive even wholesale that Silver Anchor stuff was.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Now imagine being a 16-year-old kid whose all of my money was coming from doing chores on the farm,
Yeah.
so getting Jack's discount, which was better than wholesale. It wasn't quite
Mhm.
cost, but it was better than wholesale. Made it where I could have, double aught rings for my nipples and double aught rings for my PA. And I think I was the first or second set of eyelets they ever made for stretched earlobes, because
Cool.
their clientele wasn't that clientele.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Gauntlet had probably been making them by that point, but Silver Anchor had never made them. And I remember having to go into their production place was a double wide trailer with no air conditioning. And I just remember going in there, these toothless rednecks that Ed had as his jewelers. These guys didn't know, shit from Shinola when it came to what the jewelry did.
Yeah.
And just like trying to show them, like, well, it's going to fit in the ear where it doesn't fall out, but the lip can't be too big that it doesn't go in. And having this kid explain to you that, the function of an eyelet was probably nothing that they thought was going to be in their career. And yeah, so I stretched my PA up, and I started taking pictures at Jack's house with my little like box camera. And there was this point where he told me and my brother, he's like, if you guys are going to be coming up, you should get a better camera.
Hmm.
Christmas is coming up. Take this note to your mom. And we took this note to our mom, didn't read it because it was not for us. And he had written down what camera we should own,
Oh,
which it was a Canon EOS Rebel,
yeah.
35 millimeter. And he's like, if you're going to be coming to my house to meet these people, I want you to start taking their photos. I want you to start asking them where they're coming from, like why
Yeah.
are you here and all this, because Jack was seeing we were the anomaly being 15 and 16, but he was starting to see more 22-year-olds and 25-year-olds, people that weren't just older gay guys who wanted heavy work. And he was starting to see that shift was about to happen. He had
Yeah.
modern primitives. He was seeing younger and younger people get involved. And I think that, and maybe it's just, my hope that this is what he wanted for me to do for the next 30 years is I think he wanted what he loved about body modification to be carried on by people.
Mm.
And, I don't think that he was resistant to the change. He just wanted people left who still had that same mindset of being able to control every part of your aesthetic and your body.
I think for like the modern industry, that's been a noticeable shift for how apprenticeships are done because apprenticeships, not that I got one, but uh, I think some of the better ones were where somebody really like had a personal connection and was like, I want to teach you all of the things that I learned from other people so that the knowledge keeps moving forward. And now like you can get piercers who are trained really well to be good piercers, but it doesn't feel like it's the same like hand me down information. It feels like it's more like here's a curriculum and not like here are all my experiences, do what you want with them to move forward. So I notice kind of a difference for how people share
Well,
information these days.
very much so. It's not, I want to teach you how to pierce. I want to teach you how I pierce.
Yeah.
I want to teach you how I interact with clients, how my, not aesthetic, ethos,
Yeah.
like shop culture,
Hmm.
this is what I love about it, and I want you to be an evangelist for what I love about it. And then
Yeah.
you're going to, of course, build your own life experience into it. So when you teach somebody, there's still, I had this really, really weird experience at conference this year. And this guy came up to me, probably a little bit younger than me, but not by much. And if he's listening, I apologize that I don't remember his name. And he said, "Are you Shawn Porter?" And whenever somebody says that, I usually apologize. Yeah, unfortunately, there's points in my life where I've been a huge asshole. I'm not super proud of that, but you hopefully live and grow. And generally, when people come up with that, "Are you Shawn Porter?" it can go,
Either way,
yeah,
the punch in the nose or a big hug.
or both. Fuck,
Yeah.
I deserve both sometimes. And apparently, on Rec Art's Body Art, I had seen his piercing, and as this brash like 23-year-old, I said, "If you're going to keep piercing like that, you should just quit.
Hmm.
What you're doing isn't good. The way you're doing it isn't good." And this is coming from the hubris of somebody who didn't even pierce for a living. But bad is bad. And he's like, "Yeah, man." He's like, "I fucking got so mad at you, and I got good despite you. Like I fucking, and I'm just sitting there like, I had a couple of cocktails in me. Me and Mick Rawls were gonna do our midnight run, And he's like, "Yeah, man, like I held on to that for years, and because of you being like shitty to me to prove to you that I wasn't bad, I got good. And I met my wife because of piercing. I have kids because of piercing. And like a little bit of that goes into them every time I pierce them, is this desire to just be good.
Yeah.
What the hell am I supposed to make of that?" It was incredibly, incredibly touching. Like this guy was just carrying the idea of "I can always be better" on because some asshole was mean to him on Rec Art's Body Art.
Yeah.
And weirdly, Keith Alexander, who's no longer with us, who passed in 2005, he always told me he broke people's balls to like hope that they would prove him wrong.
Like rise to a challenge.
Yeah. And not that I deserve to be the one challenging you, but it was just a very sweet thing. Again, I was a little tipsy, so I didn't catch his name, but he gave me the most genuine hug and the sweetest, like, "You're an asshole, but thanks" kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I guess that's better than "You're an asshole and fuck you."
Yeah, definitely. That brings up a question that it was Lola's question to ask you is when you were like learning all these different things about piercing and you had this level of access that I think a lot of people would have been really fortunate to have. Did you ever have a desire to become like a retail piercer, like a career job piercer?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Um, I go to see more movies than any human should.
Hmm.
I collect Blu-rays. I talk about film. I manage an art house cinema. Never had anything to say as far as making a movie.
Yeah.
I feel like I love the people I've met through piercing, but when it becomes a job,
Mm.
knowing all of you guys, having access that I have to you guys, like listening to your end of workday stories, I'm good, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hanging out at the shop and somebody coming in to get their like hood pierced or their PA pierced, and them having to like, you know, Lysol the room because apparently people didn't know that you should shower before you should come in for a piercing.
It is
Um,
nice.
Piercing somebody's tongue and them throwing up on you,
Yeah.
biting your hand, needle sticks.
I pierced somebody's tongue, and right in the middle of them piercing their tongue, they sneezed, and they just sneezed spit and blood in my face.
And I can have all the fun parts of piercing without that.
Right.
Obviously, I did some surgical mod work, and I was talking to a friend that I met relatively recently. They're a front of house person that wants to transition to piercing, and I was talking about that trauma dumping. We didn't
Mm.
have the term for it, and I remember the first time I did a hood splitting on somebody. And my interest in doing the mods was just because most of the guys I knew doing them were gay men, and they really weren't comfortable around anatomy that wasn't a penis. So I had people coming to me like, "I'd like my labia removed, I'd like my hood split." And I would try to send them to these guys, and the guys are like, I don't know that, you know. So I started doing it almost as a utilitarian thing. If you want this hood splitting, I'll help you until somebody else
Mhm.
comes along and is, more comfortable with it than I was. And I remember the first person I did the hood splitting on told me about, pretty graphic sexual trauma in their background and how they're reclaiming their body, which was this beautiful experience to be part of, to help somebody feel more comfortable with their sexuality, with their anatomy. And then like by the fourth time and fifth time somebody poured that trauma out on you, you're just kind of like, yeah, yeah, and I'm so sorry. Like, we put the clamps on you,
Yeah.
and I just, from a piercer's point of view, I think what you guys do has an intimacy that, tattooing is like a marathon, right? You just go in there, you lay down, you put your headphones on, and you just hope it's over in 4 hours. With piercing, you have a little bit more of a intimacy with the customer, with why they're there. Most people are getting pierced in some sort of transitional point in their life. They
It's
got,
an emotional sprint. Like if you compare tattooing to a marathon, a piercing is like an emotional sprint where maybe you only have a 10, 20, 30-minute interaction, but it's this really intense 10 or
yeah,
20 minutes sometimes. But you also can sometimes get 5 or 10 of those intense emotional connections in a day. So after months or years of it, you're just kind of like, all right, have a good day. On to the next one. And it's
yeah.
strange.
And I mean, I was a bar GM for a while, and when I would be bartending, most people who were coming to me were coming because they were having a really good day or a really bad day.
Hmm.
And I think that's pretty analogous to piercing, right? You have somebody coming in because, like, I mean, me personally, I've lost 70 pounds in the last 2 years. Like, my body's weird to me right now. Maybe if I get a new tattoo, I'll like myself a little bit more. And
Yeah.
they're coming in and they're telling you about their body images, and you start thinking about, man, maybe I need to lose 5 pounds, or or somebody talking about more serious stuff like sexual trauma. And I think that with the new generation, the people who came after you, for example, they're a lot more trauma informed. They're a lot more,
Mhm.
they know how to process people's incredibly harrowing experiences as part of their job. But I think people in your generation and before you, nobody, no, during your apprenticeship, which obviously you didn't get, they teach you how to take care of your equipment. They teach you how to buy good jewelry. Nobody teaches you how to deal with somebody who's having this incredibly emotional experience, as a positive or a negative.
Yeah.
And maybe you get somebody coming in on the best day of their life and you pierce them and they're just toxically positive, and now you're like, well, fuck, my life kind of sucks,
Mhm.
So now, man, piercing as a profession, never on the radar. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of that was because my early experience at Jack's house, it was such a informal experience, right? You when you got pierced at Jack's, you got pierced in his living room. So for me, piercing was this communal bunch of naked guys out by the pool. You're in the living room on your hands and knees about to get your geesh pierced. Somebody comes in and makes a butthole joke, and everyone laughs, and then they go out and have an Eskimo pie or whatever. So for me, piercing is very, very casual.
Yeah.
And the level that you guys have to go through. I mean, thankfully, I think you guys are past the whole point where you think you're doctors, right?
Yeah, I think like the gold era is what we're in right now, and I think that people have moved so far away from that like kind of aspect of body piercing where now it's just like, oh, body piercing, and it's this whole other thing now.
So it's less camo cargo shorts and hoodies and more suits and ties.
It's not so much suits and ties, but it's like that whole salon look of like everybody wears black and they look very smart and
Sure.
tidy and all that stuff. It's yeah, it's not a lot of cargo shorts these days.
And man, so I say it all the time. It's whatever the piercing industry is now has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that I, along, especially with my partnership with Shannon Larrett, like we certainly influenced directions, but what it is now, when I came to APP this year, as you know, this is 2024 for me, is the year of saying yes
Hmm.
to everything that is asked of me. Somebody asked me to come to APP. I came. It was not on my travel list for this year had I not been asked. And it just, I don't really recognize it, and that's a good thing, you know. I mean, it's these things have to move on, they have to change, they have to do whatever. What it represents isn't really for me anymore.
Mhm.
I think gold's tacky. You give me surgical stainless steel with a surgical stainless steel bead, I'm pretty happy.
I know that like the gold era has been really good to a lot of shops and piercers and business owners and all that stuff, but every trend that comes is a trend that goes, and sooner or later the gold trend will fizzle out in ways and something else will come in. And I think that like the 90s are so romanticized that I think that that 90s style of piercing is kind of poised to come back, like heavy, chunky, raw metal, steel, titanium, stuff like that. And I'm ready for it because I went through it. But hopefully some of these piercers who started in like the gold era will be ready for, some of the cool retro stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing it in tattooing.
Hmm.
I'm seeing it heavy in tattooing. One of my favorite tattooers these days is Chad Chesko from Massachusetts. Or no, yeah, he's in Boston. Chesko, I met in Florida in the '90s. He worked for Annette down at Blue Devil. I have some old stuff from him. I have some new stuff from him, and he is just living that '90s dream, man.
Yeah.
Like biomet tubes and pipes and acid vats and fetuses and because he's like, fuck, man, like I'm almost 50. This is the shit I liked when I was a kid. I'm doing it now.
Yeah.
So you're definitely seeing the '90s aesthetic hit tattooing. It would be interesting to see how that translates to piercings. And I know in the private bitch sessions I have with a lot of piercers in our age group, apparently nobody does. I should never say nobody. More and more younger piercers aren't doing genital piercings. I know people who say they can't find anything bigger than 6 gauge and good quality.
Hmm.
It takes less than 6 months to get in for their clients.
Yeah.
It came back. Now, I guess you guys are using what, titanium now? Not,
Titanium is kind of the top right now, but there's
I'd
other
say,
stuff out there too.
I'd say as long as it looks like surgical stainless, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
You know,
That silver look. The big silver chunky rings and balls.
oh man, it looked so cool.
Yeah.
It looked so cool. I mean, you'd meet these guys, and a lot of the guys, because we talk about the piercing as a subculture. A lot of these guys I met through Jack look fairly square.
Hmm.
They'd look like somebody's dorky uncle or dorky grandpa. And, Jack would take us out by the pool and they'd start unbuttoning. And then you just see double aught nipple rings, no indication from the neck up. And then just, one 0 gauge scrotum piercing on one side and then like a 16 on the other side.
Yeah.
This completely asymmetrical, gnarly, because they weren't trying to get some sort of look, the nose chain thing that's currently popular in piercing. Like I saw somebody on a septa bus the other day with it, a
Mhm.
non-industry person, like there's a uniformity to piercing now
Yeah.
that I miss the guys who just were so off on their own path,
Mm.
like they didn't. And the '90s killed that, obviously, like with BME. Shannon and I kind of created a BME look.
Right. Well, so okay, so to talk about that a little bit, there are so many different questions I could ask you. I could ask you how the Jack Yount kind of era of your life kind of transition into the SPC era in your life, transition into the BME era in your life. But with a lot of those things, like the BME aesthetic definitely resonates with me because like I think when you see somebody like on a public transport with a nose chain, they must have seen it and been inspired by like somebody else's persona, personality, like, archetype, and been like, I'll have that. When I saw a lot of stuff on BME, I was like this teenage kid that was just like, what's all this piercing stuff? What's scarification? Oh my God. And seeing like modern primitives and a lot of other stuff. When I got on BME, it was just like, there it is. That's it. I'm one of those. I'm going to do that.
Sure. So it's funny when you look at the two, modern primitives versus BME, right? Modern primitives, you had a bunch of people doing the same things, but everyone looked kind of different.
Hmm.
And then you have BME, and slowly it got refined into everyone kind of looking the same.
Right.
Shannon, Shannon, I have a lot of love for. Our relationship was complicated, was very complicated. He was an unreliable narrator.
Hmm.
So a lot of times you would be able to cross check things that he had said at one point and then things he had said at another point, and they were radically different. So what the truth is, anytime you dealt with Shannon, was situational. He claims that BME is actually pronounced be me.
Mm.
And on a long enough timeline, you start seeing people kind of starting to look like him.
Yeah, well, now that you say it that like directly, if I had to make a joke about what the BME aesthetic was, it'd be like, well, shaved head, big stretched ears, a lot of heavy black work tattooing it, and it's like, oh yeah, Shannon.
Maybe some white tattoos on the face.
Yeah, maybe.
Um, yeah, and I delineate when we talk about the modern history of modification. It's like people who were getting modified before BME and people who were getting modified because of BME,
Hmm.
and then people getting modified post BME. And the aesthetics of the people before and after have a little bit more chaos to them versus the uniformity of the BME years. And I
Yeah.
think BME was incredibly important. And I would never, my feelings about my time with BME are very, very, like I said, it's complicated. Shannon was a dynamic person. I was a dynamic person. I was not a rich person, so I lost a lot of arguments when money was involved. Um, and I love the guy, but there were definitely fruit of the poison tree during that era, where we were too young and naive to really notice a lot of the red flags.
Hmm.
And now when you kind of go back and look at it, it's like, holy fuck, like we created this thing that we weren't mature enough to control. And as we got older, I kind of went more conservative with it, and he kind of went more radically liberal with it. It would be interesting to see who he would be now. Again, with the unreliable narration, I forget the exact numbers, but there were points where Shannon was getting millions of views a day on
Yeah.
DVD. I think SPC's best month was 3 million in a month. And think about Modern Primitives with a print run of 100,000 over the last 40 years. Charles Gatewood told me one time that the Flash videos he made, he would start with 50 copies per title, and if they sold out would make more, but usually he wouldn't have to. So some of these Flash videos, the erotic tattooing and body piercing series, for example, Painless Steel, that we in community consider iconic, imagine some of those tapes had less than 50 sets of eyes on them.
Yeah.
Modern Primitives, if they put out 100,000 copies, yeah, you might have shared it with a buddy. So let's just say 200,000 people saw it, or 300,000. That's not even what people, like, in an hour BME was getting at its heyday.
Yeah.
So we weren't we weren't worldly enough to know the global impact of what our ideology was getting out there. And as I got older, I started being a little bit more conservative with it. Maybe we shouldn't be tattooing people's eyeballs. Maybe we shouldn't be doing silicone. Silicone's an interesting one because when Jack was getting all that silicone injected in his scrotum and penis, he was a 68-year-old man who had AIDS. He wasn't seeing 10 years in the future as part of his life plan.
Yeah, it wasn't a factor.
And you start, Shannon had suicidal ideation for most of his life. So when he gets his eyeballs tattooed, he never thought he was going to live to 40 anyway.
Hmm.
And you see younger people doing the silicone stuff. There's a gentleman, I think he goes by Noodles and Beef, and he's like this big silicone advocate. And somebody in his family, his kink family, died of an embolism because of this silicone, and the person who did it was a sacred debris supporter who had never done really heavy modification work. He just started doing it based on what the internet told him how to do. And when he saw that that he killed somebody, he killed himself.
Mm.
This is something that realistically silicone shouldn't be done. I would never tell you not to tattoo your eyeball because you're an adult, do your thing. I would just say, man, it's not worth losing an eye because so you can have blue, blue or green eyes. I started getting more, I mean, conservative's not the right word, but just concerned,
Yeah.
and
I
Shannon.
think maybe as you get a little bit older, you start to think more about the consequences because when you're in that younger period of your life, like consequences aren't a factor. You just want to see if you can do it.
Yeah, and every time something really bad doesn't happen, you're emboldened to do more. I remember Shannon's big thing of calling people cultural revolutionaries for doing progressively more dangerous stuff. And it's like, I just don't think somebody losing their vision is worth it for a modification.
Yeah.
You know, I I worry about unqualified. How are you qualified to do eyeball tattooing? So I was going to say I worry about unqualified people doing it. I worry about qualified people doing it. You know,
So that might bring up another topic to talk about in as much comfort zone detail time as you might like, but this is coming from the person who was putting on the ModCon events.
right? I mean, so this is coming from the 24-year-old who put
Yeah.
on the ModCon event. I work with 24-year-olds now who've never left Philadelphia.
Hmm.
I work with 24-year-olds now who good kids, but man, like 24 is so young. Shannon and I, we were I think 24 and 25 when we did ModCon. And those events, I mean, Ryan, you went to one. Those events were dirty.
Yeah.
We were just like, yeah, fuck it. If you want to get this stuff done, this is how you get it done.
Yeah.
You know, I would not have the hubris at 50 to do a ModCon event. We were radically unqualified to do the stuff we were doing. And thankfully, that first event, we did have somebody go to the hospital. Thankfully, it was in Canada. They're kind of a no questions asked ER. And it was, I think, maybe a trans. Oh, no, no. Phil Barbosa, our ModCon photographer, said it was a turkey neck procedure where somebody had too much skin on the shaft of their penis connecting to their scrotum. So
Okay.
the practitioner cut the turkey neck off and they had complications and they ended up going to the ER in Canada. Um, we were, I mean, Shannon was a radical libertarian. And what I was saying, I think when the audio dropped out, is it would be very interesting to see who Shannon would be now.
Yeah.
Would Shannon be on Joe Rogan?
Mm.
Like he did not believe, and the story that we always tell is we used to have these ideas and we would just kind of volley back and forth. And at some point, he decided we should do a cannibal convention where we would connect people who wanted to erotically eat somebody with people who wanted to be erotically eaten.
Okay, but people who were just interested in the concept or actual like following through of the concept.
Sure,
Okay.
whatever you're comfortable with. And
Okay.
it was so weird because it was after the Sandman comic arc about the serial killer convention came out, so I can't help but think that maybe he was influenced by that. Actually, you know what? It might have been before that because it was before ModCon, which was '99, or maybe it was after the first. I'm getting old, Ryan. It all blends together. But yeah, like he's telling me, man, like, nah, man, like there are these people who want to eat people, and there are these people who want to get eaten. Like, wouldn't it be interesting if we got them together? And he drew a
Mm.
logo. Like he was looking into hotels in like northern Ontario, and there was like this like you can't do anything on site, you can't do anything within like 100 miles, but
Yeah. But if you want to eat a guy, yeah.
and I don't think that I'm a fuddy-duddy because I think that we shouldn't put people like that in touch.
Yeah, okay, yes. So it's not like you're being like the oppressor because you don't want to facilitate cannibalism.
Yeah, and
But yeah.
we would get into these arguments, when he did that chapter in the ModCon book about eating testicles and eating penises. And yeah, it was absolutely something that people had done, but it was by no means common.
Mhm.
It was by no means something that, I mean, most of these folks who wanted castrated wanted nothing to do with their testicles. Now, the people who were doing the castrations were a lot more fetishistically based, but he puts that chapter in, and there was this kind of laissez-faire, like, to you people, this may seem so controversial. And it was like a smugness
Yeah.
that we were just all out there eating nuts, and that was clearly something that, I don't think the word edge lord had been invented yet, but the just casualness with which it was implied that this was a common occurrence. It was certainly nothing that happened at any of the MudCon events.
Yeah.
It was something that the majority of the heavy mods practitioners I knew were like, oh, that's just stupid. You just throw it away.
Yeah.
He wanted to be the guy that was just okay with everything. And the problem with that is Shannon was one of those dudes who, right place, right time, right skill set. The majority of stuff people credit to Shannon came from other people.
Hmm.
And towards the end of his life, he was a lot more honest about my role in building up BME Extreme, which he thought that the stuff that I contributed to BME Extreme gave BME its point of view. Depending on how mad he was at Rachel, he would talk about how much Rachel did to keep BME, to make BME the thing that it was. But for the most part, I remember when we did that first Scar Wars in 2005, he got 3,000 photos or something submitted to BME, and I got 20.
Oh.
And he would be embarrassed, but he would forward me the thank you emails that people that I invited to Scar Wars would send to him, thanking him for Scar Wars, which had nothing to do with BME.
Yeah.
So, he needed that reputation of this kind of iconoclast who just, eat testicles, put together cannibals. And I don't think I'm the asshole for not.
I want to just, I'm going to grab something really quick so I can
Sure.
mention something else. I got your book in the mail the other day. You had a nice little thing at the beginning that says, to Shannon Larrett and all the trouble we got into, and to Rachel Larrett for always getting us out of it.
I miss her, Ryan. I miss her almost every day.
Yeah.
And it's been since Shannon passed in, what, 2013.
I don't remember the year, but that sounds right.
And I loved him. I miss him, but I don't miss him in the way I miss her.
Hmm.
She was just such an enabler for our stupidity, but in kind of like a fun mom way, even though she
Yeah.
was, younger than us both. I think she passed at 42. But she would just we would call her up and basically be like, Mom, we need more anesthetics. Mom,
Yeah.
the police might be involved. And Rachel, she would just look at us with this, like, what are you idiots doing?
Hmm.
But like there was so much love to it,
Yeah.
and she just enabled our bad ideas. But she would also step up and say, I think we're crossing lines with this. And if I would tell Shannon, I think we're going too far, he would disregard it. And if Rachel would tell Shannon, I think we're going too far, he would disregard it. I think that when there was like me and Rachel and Phil, like, hey, we shouldn't do this, he would usually listen. If there was a
Yeah.
communal, like, we're not really, and case in point was that last ModCon, the one that wasn't really a ModCon. I think that was 5, the one that was decentralized,
Hmm.
which is when he and the other two got their eyeballs tattooed. It was because we weren't there to say don't do it.
Okay.
He had problems with that the rest of his life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Like I had very little contact with him once, BME changed when it had the chapter where it kind of changed. I talked to him much. I tried to kind of watch from afar the things that he would put out in blogs and things like that. And it just always seemed like the eye was this constant thing. And it's like, well, yes, maybe not the best idea to have like put pictures of it online like that day. Maybe you should have waited a year and maybe you would have
yeah.
seen that. It's like, this is not a great idea.
I mean, there was, when we still did Ask BME, started out as question of the day, then became Ask BME. There was an email. I mean, I don't know if the other volunteers got it, but I got an email from Shannon saying, hey, like, let's not talk about the negative side effects to eyeball tattooing because I really want to see where it goes. Even though he was having this, it was like kind of glaucoma like pressure where he just kept feeling like it. And he went to the hospital, I want to say like 6 or 7 times.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, like I said, he was one of the most inspirational characters in my life, but it was rough sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one thing that I've kind of learned over, getting older is parasocial relationships are always not always great. Like when I was in my 20s and around that BME time, I really looked up to a bunch of people on BME as like heroes in a way. And then over life, when you realize that like they're flawed human beings just like every other human being,
Yeah.
and like hearing some good and some bad and some whatever, and just kind of being like, oh yeah, like it's not always healthy to like idolize people to that level. And I think with Shannon being remote for a lot of people, like an online presence where he got idolized in this way where he probably didn't have a lot of controls, so he inspired a ton of people, but maybe not all of it was with like, good results.
Yeah, I was it 2014, maybe even 2013 when I went to conference. Yeah, it was 2013 when he passed. And I went to conference and I was going to eulogize him. And this very nice young man came up to me in the bar and he's like, "Hey, I used to send Shannon messages really late at night and he'd respond." And I was waiting for the second half of the conversation. It's like he just
Yeah,
let me know that
yeah,
Shannon responded to him.
yeah,
It's like, well, yeah, that's his job. Like
yeah,
if you have this parasocial relationship with him, you'll keep buying memberships and you'll keep buying t-shirts and you'll keep buying belt buckles and patches and pins and all this. And so he's like, "Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I know you were super close to him and you're probably missing him a lot. I don't want to make it about me." And I'm like, "Yeah, I miss him." And he's like, "Well, can I just send you emails at night?" It's like, I mean, I guess.
hmm.
Like, do you just want me to tell you that like you're doing okay? Like I can maybe do that. I don't know what you were looking for, but it's not the only time that's ever come up where people would let me know that Shannon used to respond to them. It's sort of like,
Maybe you'd feel in that way where it's like, when you were connecting with people through correspondence in a way where if people were out there in the world, like for me, I felt really alone because I'm just, in New Hampshire, and really nobody in the area that was into the stuff I was into, and not knowing where you fit in your own life and your world and your purpose and blah blah blah, all the existential things, and then seeing a bunch of other people trying to figure it out on a website, and when the people that you look up to, uh another thing that I might want to talk to you about, but I know that this next coming year will be the 20th anniversary of Star Wars,
yeah,
and which is crazy to say out loud.
yeah. It
Um,
does not. It feels like it's been 25 since ModCon, but it does not feel like it's been 20 since the first Star Wars.
no, not at all. Like I think that that's one of those things where you're like, oh shit, yeah, we're all getting older really fast. But that was a huge moment for me because like with piercing, it was like, yeah, I'm a piercer, and like now, yeah, I go to APP and all that stuff. But like Star Wars was like a really impactful thing for me personally because like I was doing this stuff and I was trying to figure it out, and like I had a couple of parts of the puzzle figured out, and then I got thrown into this event with all these other people who had these other parts of the puzzle figured out or maybe put together in different ways. And um I think that that was such a huge chapter with scarification overall, way beyond people being able to see pictures or make like blog posts on BME, is like being able to like stand there and watch somebody do something and how they held the tool or what tool they used or how their hands moved and how they did this and that and whatever. And it was amazing, and it was an amazing chapter of my life, and I was really appreciative to be able to be part of it.
So I find myself, I never want to piss in anyone's Cheerios, right? Like if something means a lot to somebody, for me, that first ModCon, one of my proudest moments in this 30-year path I've been on. Second one was okay. Third one was disappointing. Fourth one, and
Yeah.
that for Star Wars the same. Like I think we really did something subculturally important. The
Hmm.
second one was fun. The third one, not so proud of that one. There was a bat. Yeah. um, it just existed in this place beyond what tattoo conventions and what APP, like inviting guests was an afterthought.
Yeah.
And the only reason I eventually invited guests was to hopefully, get an admission fee from them so we could offset some of the cost of doing the event. Like for me, it was really about you guys being able to like, I mean, I remember watching Dave Gilstrap cut for the first time, and it was so different than the way, you cut or
Hmm.
Jesse Vilmar
Or like Decker. Yeah.
yeah, and just the idea that like we all had this thing and we all did it completely differently to get the exact same result.
Yeah.
And I just remember like at one point, and keep in mind, man, I was going through a divorce. I mean, that's why I kept leaving. I was drunk all the time. I was going through this incredibly emotional part of my life too. And that last night when Decker cut my face, I just remember a woman named Lauren, who was a good friend of mine at the time, came over and just kind of organically, held my hand.
Hmm.
And then somebody else came over organically. I didn't call them over and put their hand on my leg. And all of a sudden, it was just the stragglers because it was one of the last cuttings, the last night of the event. And these people, some of whom I was incredibly intimate with, and some of whom I still don't know their names now, just came over and they saw somebody going through a hard time. And the hard time wasn't the cutting on my face. The hard time was this life change I was going through. And they just organically knew what to do,
Yeah.
and everyone just kind of was there for me during this thing. And I don't really see that duplicated at places like APP. I kind of did see it a little bit at BMXnet,
Hmm.
much more casual, much more like, my wife was able to suspend and people she didn't even know were coming up and just like watching her, but not in that predatory, like, I've got to get my picture for social media. Like, man,
Yeah.
this person's really having a good
Hmm.
experience. And that first Star Wars, the way I saw people interact with each other, I'm super, super happy that I was able to put you guys all together.
Well, it has a lasting effect because it's tough to like fully articulate it because scarification still today is such a small circle, and especially the people who have been active for more than 10 years ish, and sometimes like when I'm talking to people who are really experienced with scarification and who've been doing it for a long time, they'll make these little references that hardly anybody else in the world would understand when they talk about methods to perform scarification. They refer to it as like, oh yeah, like the gill strap method with like, rolling and peeling and
Yeah.
this and that and the way that all these different people do these hyper specific things. And it's like just being able to know what they're talking about. It's just like, you feel this like kind of almost unspoken connection of just like, I get it. I get it. And it's like, I don't think that that would have happened any other way because you couldn't get that full experience just online. You had to be together. And
Yeah.
that's why I like BMX so much is because that's kind of, it's that same vibe of BME and Star Wars and that kind of collaborative and communal experience. And, there's the scarification artist Kevin Jump in Arizona. And I was really inspired by what he was doing.
Kevin Jump is the only person named Kevin that I like.
Oh, well, what about Kevin McAllister? But
Nope. Don't even like
uh,
Kevin Porter.
but I wanted to get Kevin over to BMX because like, he wasn't at Star Wars and I feel like he would have slotted right in there. He wasn't at Ron's event in London, the ScarCon, he would have slotted right in there. So I wanted to try to get him to one of these communal scarification experiences while there still were ones going on.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, like Star Wars was really important. Star Wars 2, like I remember some fun stuff about it. Star Wars 3, I remember was a bit more stressful for lots of people involved, probably yourself, like top of the list.
Did not love it.
Yeah, yeah,
Did not love it, because it got out of control and it was like, it was getting harder and harder to find places that would, no questions asked, let me rent it for a weekend.
yeah.
And I just wasn't into it. I had lost so much money. I think I lost like total 15 grand on these events.
Wow.
And, at the time I could afford it. But it was just like, why am I doing this, man?
Hmm.
Like I'm not even into scarification. Like I'm into that very specific ritual kind, which is I think why I connect so heavily with Kevin Jump's work right now, is because Kevin is just coming from a similar mindset. You'll remember I never invited any of you guys to Star Wars.
Hmm.
You said you wanted to come. I said yes or no. Keith Alexander was the only person I officially invited.
Hmm.
And he said, hell no.
Yeah.
And I said, why not? He's like, whatever these guys are doing is not what I'm doing.
Hmm.
And that was not a slight to you guys at all.
No.
He
Yeah.
just, what he loved about scarification was this shared ritual, this blood, this pain. And
Mm.
I talked about that in the ModCon lecture guide, is like, our subculture, we go through pain together. We bleed together, and not in
Hmm.
that like we play rugby and like we get all sweaty and maybe a bloody nose. Like, we go through relatively physically, spiritually, psychically traumatic events together. And there is that point where you look up and you see somebody, and I've got blood running down my face at Scar Wars, and I'm going through this divorce, and I'm like trying to figure out who I am now. I'm in my, I think I just turned 30, and I got connected, like eye contact with somebody, and they just kind of had that like, yeah, man, been there, I,
Yeah.
maybe not from my face or whatever. And when you see that the work that Kevin's putting out, he's not trying to be a tattoo artist. He's just really connected with clients on a way that I think Keith would be really happy about. And it's going to be interesting. I've spent 30 years really geeking out about other people's histories and backstories and all that, preparing the ModCon lecture for VMXNet this year and preparing the Star Wars one for next year. It's weird to be a character in that narrative,
Hmm.
and I've tried I tried a lot to not disabuse people of good feelings that they had about things, like uh there were people that Shannon very much didn't want me to invite to ModCon. And he would yell at me about inviting them. And then when I would win some fights and lose some fights, he would be the one who emails them.
Yeah.
And I heard somebody recently talk about, yeah, and then Shannon emailed me, that invite. And I'm like, yeah, man, he hated you. um, and you don't want to disabuse anyone of these experiences they had. So like,
Hmm.
how much truth do you tell?
Right.
How much of your own baggage are you bringing into it? By the third ModCon, I hated ModCon. Why did I do a fourth one? By the third Star Wars, I hated it. Why did I do a third one?
Yeah.
And you just kind of get to the point where you don't want somebody else to tell the story, and you don't want to sanitize it too much, but you also don't want to take away. You guys didn't need to know how much money it was costing me. You guys didn't need to know like who was threatening to like call the police on us for, like that second one, we were in a building that we weren't allowed to be in.
Okay.
Like and there was a scarification artist who wanted to come. I told them they couldn't come, and they're like, cool, I'll just, it's illegal in LA. I'll just call the police and you guys will all go to jail. So like, as I'm checking people in, and as a stormtrooper comes in with his stormtrooper blaster, I'm like, you need to take your helmet off. Like, are you the guy who's going to call the police on us?
Yeah. Yeah.
Turned out to be a lovely man. I was talking to his wife yesterday, actually. Um, but like, you guys didn't need to know that. You just needed to have a good time.
Mm.
So I'm facing that now. I'm going to give myself a lot more time to talk about Star Wars, because I put together that ModCon one relatively quickly, and it's like, I mean, the video you sent, I think I used like a minute of it. You were pretty hard on yourself. Talking about,
Wow.
like there was, you were kind of like standoffish because you didn't really know anybody, and you looked up to these people. I mean, there was a somebody at Star Wars 1, you had headphones in when you were working on them, and he was asking you to stop cutting, and you didn't hear him. And to that guy, man, you might be a villain in the story.
Yeah.
And I thought you were a little harder on yourself than you needed to be. I don't want to be like toxic about my events, because I do love them. I just, we had to see how the sausage was made. You guys just got to eat it, you know?
Yeah. Like, people are going to have their version of that weekend. And I've heard several versions of those weekends, and some of it's funny and some of it's like, oh man, that doesn't sound like you had a good time at all. But I think people are appreciative that the events happened, even the third one.
I mean, you guys did some fun stuff at it,
Yeah.
you guys did some fun stuff at it, but it was kind of like, it was sort of like Jack seeing that shift in where things were coming and not knowing how it was going to work out. By that last, I go back and look, and like for some reason, all my photographers always wanted to do like nudes when they took photos. And now, as I'm putting this book together for ModCon, I'm looking like, well, would that person want their nude
Mm,
shown? And I have the model
right.
releases. I can legally do whatever I want. At what point do you want to try to like, and it's easy enough to reach out to people like, hey man, like this is the photo. How would you like it cropped and all this stuff? Um, it was still a very kind of like freewheeling, chaotic, like everyone getting naked, everyone partying, and that's just not the way things are now. Probably thankful.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
I remember, so I was at ModCon 4, and I remember somebody was getting work done below the waist, and then their practitioner was just like, oh, because like the client was like, oh, I just feel weird being naked in front of people I don't know. And he's like, oh, well, I'll get naked too. And he just whipped off his clothes, and I was just like, I'm not going to take off my clothes. Even if
yeah.
anybody asks, I'm going to keep them all on.
And we still to this day thank you for that. No, yeah, and it was, I mean, especially ModCon, obviously, is that first one was almost exclusively fetishistic practitioners, right?
Mhm.
So we had Cynthia Hurt, who is a dominatrix. We had Patrick Bartholomew, who was a dom. We had Dave, who had a sexual interest in female genital modification. Lucas was kind of the outlier. There was still like that kind of like cyber fetishy thing, but it was more fashiony at the time than what these other people. And yeah, it was fairly common for the practitioners to be working completely naked,
Yeah.
because that was, if you got castrated, your castrator was probably working completely naked. If you got any of the stuff, I mean, half the time when Jack was piercing me, he didn't have a shirt on. That was just very much part of that culture then. And
Yeah.
because that's what I knew, that's what I brought to ModCon. And because
Mhm.
Shannon had never really met any of these people in person, this was all like academic to Shannon. He had never
Yeah.
met these practitioners. Whereas I was like, oh yeah, I knew this guy from Jack. I knew this guy from Jack. He just, the vision that we put forth was very much based on my experiences with body mod.
Mhm.
And that was a lot of sexuality, a lot of nudity, and a lot of, and casual nudity. It wasn't creepy nudity.
Yeah. It
It-
wasn't like an orgy
no, not
all
at
the
all.
time.
Well, not during the business hours,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like it was just like, yeah, man, like these are like guys. I mean, again, these guys who did all this stuff to their dicks wanted people to see their dicks.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of always the vibe that I got is like, well, we're doing this stuff to our bodies, so it's like, look at my body.
Yeah. And man, I'm thankful, man. I'm 50 now. Nobody needs to see me naked.
Mhm.
You know, that casual
Well,
nudity.
so to kind of transition it into maybe like what's going on in like a more modern timeline for you with like sacred debris, with your work with sacred debris. How
Yeah.
would you want to kind of talk about how that came into existence? Because like, did you have kind of like a lull where you wanted to step away from it for a while? And if you did, like what inspired you to start bringing it back and putting it out more publicly?
Sure. So I've been consistently documenting body modification for 30 plus years. So it's not always one aspect of it. So, you look at the Sacred Debris zine from 93, 94. The first iteration of the SPC website was 95. That ran to 2005. Scar Wars was 2004 to 2014. Occult Vibrations was 2011 to current. And I had kind of like, it was getting harder and harder to find people that would host this stuff. And, with Shannon not being part of BME anymore, Rachel was always very, very like, hey, anytime you want a subsection, let me know. I'll pay the bills. But it was weird. I mean, I don't think anyone should pick sides in a divorce, but there was
Mm.
definitely like a lot of behind the scenes stuff that I don't really want to talk about that
Yeah.
made me a lot more comfortable with Rachel being my parent
Hmm.
in this scenario. And so I was still kind of doing stuff with body mod, but I kind of got obsessed with like the queer side of tattooing in 2011 with occult vibrations. And I kind of really started pushing, like, oh, okay, like you're doing a tattoo of a leather daddy and he's tipping his cap. Leather daddies don't tip their cap. They never touch the brim of their mirror cap, right?
Okay.
Leather daddies will hold their hat from the side. So I was able to connect with these younger tattooers who were maybe doing Tom of Finland style portraits. And, like it was this weird mashup of like esoteric Americana with the queer stuff. And I was just really getting into not having editorial oversight with what I had to post.
Can I ask a side
Of
question?
course.
Why didn't they touch the brim of their hat?
I don't know.
Okay.
So usually the brim of a mirror, it's MUIR cap, which is the archetypical leather daddy cap, is mirrored or very shiny. So maybe it was no fingerprints.
Okay.
So leather back in the 70s especially had a lot of protocols. You never buy certain things; they had to be handed down from another top, like all this stuff. And it's sort of like you would never have certain Japanese characters in a back piece with maple leaves, because that tattoo takes place during the fall or the spring, not the fall.
Okay.
Like the semiotics of leather culture are an established thing. And these people who were just kind of drawing this stuff from scratch are like, oh no, let me tell you a cooler way to do it.
Hmm.
You could do a back piece of Kintaro and the Carp and have the wrong seasonal elements, but it would be a lot cooler if you got it right.
Yeah.
Right. And with SPC, I had to make sure that we never did too much piercing without doing some genital work. We never did too much genital work without having scarification.
Yeah.
Vibrations, I could just put up whatever the fuck I wanted, whenever the fuck I wanted. It was absolutely like I could go 3 months without updating. I could update 10 times in a day. It wasn't, people weren't paying for it. So there was no
Yeah.
pressure to put stuff up. And yeah, at some point, I guess it was late 2013, I started talking to a web host who was comfortable putting that kind of stuff back up. By that point, BME was not really as functional as it used to be. And
Yeah.
I wanted my version of history. There are these characters. I mean, we love Fakir Mushafar. We love certain people who get documented a lot. But what about this person and what about that person? And it got to the point where like people didn't really know who Jack was anymore. So I started Sacred again, obligation free, update when I feel like it, no oversight, post what I want, don't post what
Hmm.
I don't want. And I've just been kind of steadily back in it since then. And it's gone through 4 different hosts. At one point, Sacred completely took down the BME server for 24 hours, because they weren't getting that level of bandwidth anymore. And then all of a sudden they were. And
Yeah.
it took down Rachel's resume when she was trying to get a job. She's like, yeah, the whole fucking server's down. And yeah, now, man, I just, I really only care about a certain era, and that's why I have Ari Pimsler, who cares about a different era. I have Lynn Lohide helping us out. They care about a different aspect. So for the first time in a really long time, it's not just what I'm into. I there's no oversight. When Ari wants to interview somebody, he interviews them. I don't tell him who to interview. He just like, oh yeah, I'm going to interview this person and that person. And when Lynn wants to write something, they write it, and we either publish it or we don't. You know,
Yeah.
with Ari, there's been a couple of interviews where I just couldn't get behind them, and we chose not to publish them. But for the most part, and it's also rad. He's interviewing some of these people that I've known for 30 years, but I don't know this aspect of their life.
Sure.
So for me, my interest is late 1960s to about 1993, which is, mathematically removing me and BME from what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
And I'm just, I've had most of these photos in my possession for 30 years, and I still find stuff I've never seen before. I'll be going through whole Rubbermaid bins that I've never looked in.
Hmm.
And then one thing will lead to another, and we have a group chat with Dr. Matt Lauder and Paul King, where we'll just be like, hey, do you know this guy? And all of a sudden it just unfolds. Somebody who maybe Paul's been looking for info on for years and never been able to unlock, or somebody that Matt has been looking for, somebody that I've been looking for. So
Yeah.
first time in a long time, I kind of have a community with it where I can geek out on the very niche aspects that I'm into, and people either get behind it or they don't. It's really rad.
that gives me an idea for whether it's at a conference or some other sort of thing. It would be really fascinating to kind of just listen to a panel with you and Paul and Matt and just
I
the
wanted
three
to
of
be
you
called
talking.
I wanted to be called History is Written by the Wiener,
Mm.
because that's the name of our group chat. Because Ryan, there's just been so many cocks in my life. You
Yeah.
know, like Paul King and I, we have this running joke where it's like the amount of cocks that we have to identify is something that we never knew would be a thing.
Right. Like how many different like cocks that you can recognize from just a photo of just the cock?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where like he'll send me a photo. It's like, do you know who that is? Like, yeah, that's Larry. Obviously, everybody knows. I mean, everyone knows Sailor Sid's dick, right? But like, I know what Larry's dick looks like now. If you send me a close-up photo of Emil Gundelach's cock, I know it's Emil without seeing his face. And the same with him, right? I'll send him something. It's like, do you know him? It's like, yeah, of course, that's so and so. And I would have never thought, 30 years later, that we would just be cock detectives who, like, oh yeah, it's that guy. And and I'm still learning stuff about my own collection every day. Like we put out that book of images of the Incredible Till, and I was preparing Polaroids, and there was this one Polaroid I've seen it 1,000 times, and for some reason or another, Till used to put post-it notes on the back of the Polaroids with no text on it. I don't know whether it was just to protect the black backing of the Polaroid. So
Okay.
I'm laying it down on the scanner. I've got my goofy little white linen gloves on, and I set it down, and my thumb caught the edge of the polar or the post-it note, and there was a complete drawing that he had made illustrating this technique he was going to do or whatever. That I've had this thing since 1995, and I've never seen behind that post-it note.
Huh.
And talking to Paul about the legacy of Rudy Inhelder, here's a guy who I used to have like late night phone calls with when I was a teenager, and you find out that he had this network, this global network of tattooed and pierced people before that was a thing. He was doing
Yeah.
tattoo conventions in the 60s.
Hmm.
To me, he was just my kinky friend that, made passes at me at 3 in the morning when we would call on the phone. So there's still so much internally and externally that I'm finding out about these fascinating people that I grew up with. And I think about that a lot. I think, Paul, myself, not as much with Matt because he is a little bit younger than us. But we're the last generation who are going to have firsthand experiences with these people.
Right.
Fakir passed a couple of years ago, and Jack passed decades ago. And there's going to be a point where people are reading the things that Paul has written or that I've written about somebody, and they're going to be talking in an academic setting about Jack Yant or about Fakir Mushafar or about the Grangers that Paul just put that wonderful book out about. I mean, not that Paul met the Grangers, but Paul met people who met the Grangers.
Right.
And we're that last generation, at least in the era I am most fascinated by, that are going to have firsthand experience with these wonderful characters. And the cool thing is, the next generation is going to have cool characters that came up after us. Like, but for me, I just worry maybe people are going to see Jack with that huge massive silicone injected cock and all the modifications, and not know that he loved classical music, or that he loved a really really bad Danish comedian named Victor Borge. you
I
know
know Victor Borga that played the piano.
yeah, oh my god,
Yeah.
Jack loved Victor Borge, and we'd go over to his house, and he'd put these videotapes on, and he would just be laughing wildly, and I don't get it. Like I want people to understand holistically that Fakir wasn't just the character.
Hmm.
Jack Yunt wasn't just the photos you've seen of him. That these people are very real people who are much more dynamic than just the modification. And that's
So,
also my worry, that people are kind of like, the least interesting thing about you, Ryan, should be that you pierce people for a living.
hmm.
Like, we can't just be this thing that we are. We have to be dynamic humans. And these people very much were dynamic humans. And it's easy to get lost in just the dicks. It's always the dicks.
Yeah. Um, So I know that you like specifically said that you didn't want to talk about yourself, but like for like kind of like a wrap up sort of a question, like if 20 years from now, 30 years from now, there's somebody standing at the front of a room in a conference somewhere in the world and they're giving their lecture on Shawn Porter, what would you want to be like, legacy for one word to use? I mean, it like even just the conversation we've had is like so, it's got a wide arch to it. But like, is there anything that you would want people to know that wouldn't be something that they might have seen published or something? Like what would you want someone to know in a situation like that?
So there's two answers. One is that I was fun, that no matter how serious and heavy this stuff got, I tried to have fun with it. I tried to have fun with my body. I tried to encourage people to have fun with their bodies. And two would probably be that I was sorry for that asshole comment that I made. And it doesn't matter which comment it was. I mean, I certainly meet people who, when I meet them, they'll say something and it's like a compliment, like, you're not at all what I expect.
Yeah, you're not as horrible as I thought.
Yeah, and I get it because there was a point, point where maybe I was. And, I hope all the cool shit I've done outranks all the like mean shit I did when I was a young firebrand. And I was talking about it with Mike Mulcahy a while back. Like there was somebody that I was very, very consistently rude to back in the 90s. And I don't think I was wrong about why I was rude to them, but I'm certainly, certainly sorry about how I was rude to them.
Yeah.
So yeah, A, I was fun, and I hope that I brought fun to things, and B, that I'm sorry when I wasn't.
Well, it's very, very wise of you to realize that as we grow up and mature, we kind of become different people. And it's been interesting to know you as a couple different Shawn Porters so far.
What's your favorite one?
I'd say probably now, but I mean, like one of the things that I always like about interacting with you is sometimes we can just randomly have this like nerd conversation out of nowhere. You can be in an area where you can be in a room where you can definitely smell blood, but then you can be like, "Oh, did you see this new movie or, this thing or that thing?"
Yeah, I mean, well, it's weird, and I think about this a lot. So I've known you since 2004.
Around there, yeah.
Probably spent about 4 hours total with you.
Yeah, probably.
And I was thinking, so I was very blessed to be in Vegas this year for Brian Skelly's 50th birthday, and Brian was in Berlin for my 50th. And I think I met Brian when he was 18 and I was just about to turn 18.
Wow.
And this year is the most time we've spent with each other since like 1993. And we have these friendships that go really far back with people we may have spent 2 hours with total. And especially during the BME year. Oh, pardon me, Jesus. Um, Especially with the BME years, we knew each other more intimately because, like, I would go on the Fogs I am page, and you're not just talking about the new piercing you did, you're talking about what went on in your day.
Yeah.
And I loved that, man. It goes back to the zine culture, right? I love, like, I'm sitting here talking to you, and while I'm talking to you, I'm looking at the artwork behind you. I'm trying to figure out what's in that toy case. I
Oh, they're all wrestling figures.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I love having that window into people's lives, and I think that's kind of what I of all the social media sites, I think the only one I'm on anymore is Blue Sky and Instagram.
Hmm.
And Instagram's a little bit of a window into people's lives. Like, I just want to know what you're doing right now, man. I find
Yeah.
myself less and less interested. Do you still do scarification?
Yeah, but hardly.
Yeah. But like,
Yeah.
again, I really want to know what movie you saw today.
Yeah.
I want to know what you and your friends got up to. It's such a fascinating insight into people's lives that I think we're kind of missing at this time where we have more access to people's lives than we've ever had before.
Yeah.
I feel this kind of sense of like I asked Brian Skelly, a guy again who I've known for 30 years. I'm like, so how's France? He's like, oh, France is pretty good. I live in Spain now, but I'm sure France is still doing well.
Yeah.
And, here's a guy that I love very much and who's been a big part of my life for 30 years. I didn't know he had moved.
Hmm.
Like we have these little snippets of each other's lives, and it's just not like it used to be.
So I'm sure that you encounter like BME people from time to time.
Sure.
Every year that passes, I encounter like fewer and fewer of them, but sometimes you just like get these random like that's a BME person, like I go to these wrestling shows all the time, and there was a guy who was a regular there, and he was like, "Oh, I'm going to be leaving and moving to Philadelphia," and I was like, "Oh, great, have fun down there. I'm sure it's going to be awesome." And then he just like moved in with somebody, and he was just like, "Person," I was like, "I know that person from BME."
But let me just tell you, Philadelphia is not awesome. So you were wrong.
Well, okay, Philadelphia is awesome from afar.
There you go. Great
Yeah,
place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. Yeah, I mean, one of the text messages that came in while we've been talking was from a BME friend.
yeah.
Somebody I've known on BME, a Star Wars guest, BME friend, and just randomly texted me. Um, Say about a third of my Instagram feed are people from BME that had transcended from just somebody I knew from events and stuff to people that I used to party with, and now I'm seeing their kids' first musical.
Hmm.
Now I'm seeing like the life that they're leading now, and yeah, no, it was all the negative stuff, all the behind the scenes stuff. Absolutely doesn't outweigh the friendships that I've made from
Yeah,
body mind. I mean, almost every significant friendship in my life, one way or the other, has come from this disjointed, weird community.
yeah.
Some
The
of them,
real BME is the friends we made along the way.
right? Who would have fucking known? And I find like I you know I just I had you bleed with people, right? You experience pain with people, and those friendships to me, I'm finding harder as I get older to find that level of intimacy because we had to be so honest with each other because you are going through these incredible painful things with each other. And I certainly don't want to bleed anymore. Jesus.
Yeah. Well, with Facebook, like, so BME into MySpace into Facebook in a way. Now with Facebook, it's like I don't know who's seeing those posts. You can set it with whatever privacy, but like, mine would be like clients or family or just random people, and it's like I can't talk about myself. But
Yeah.
on BME, you could be like, it was this safe little, everybody was in the club, in the community, and you could just be like, let me talk about my balls.
Or let me talk about the bad mental health day I had, and
Yeah,
let
or
me
that
talk
too.
about the great day I had. Whereas now,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that the culture behind it now, you have people like my fans, my followers. It's like, well, you
Mm,
call them our friends,
right.
and that conceptual difference really does matter, in how you think you're interacting with people.
Hmm.
And I find that with Blue Sky, I think I have 30 followers, and that's probably the place I'm the most honest
Yeah.
because I can shout into the void. I had a terrible day today.
Hmm.
And it's not going to be a bunch of people trying to like tell me oh, it'll get better. I know. It just I feel like I can post anything when nobody's watching versus with something like Instagram, you're keenly aware that everyone's watching and you're like, well, I can't have a bad day because then, people are going to be bummed out,
Yeah.
I'm having a rough day.
Yeah.
I think that with BME, we got to a point where there was, I mean, it was borderline therapy for some people. It's specifically the I am subsite,
Hmm.
like you could really get in there and be like, man, this is what's going on. And
Yeah. And I made lifelong friends through there, like people I'm still friends with and who are still important to me today. And like I don't connect with people that way now because like I have to be like, public Ryan in a lot of ways, but BME, you were part of a community. You weren't like talking to an audience. You were talking to your friends and your community.
I mean, there was something to be said for Shannon capping it at 16,000 users.
Hmm.
I think the term that he used a lot was walled garden. And you did feel, and I saw the shift, like you would, even when the other social media sites started happening, MySpace coming out and all that, like you would post your mundane stuff to MySpace and then your suspension stuff to BME because you didn't want your aunt to see it. And now
Yeah.
people want their aunt to see it. And I think that's great, that this stuff has integrated into people's real 365 lives. But yeah, I certainly don't feel as comfortable being as open off of I am as I was on it.
Yeah.
Even if
Mhm.
it was 16,000 users, it was in theory 16,000 users that kind of got where you were coming from.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of those relationships are still very, very real. And
Mm.
I saw like a BME shirt a while back out in the wild, and now maybe some kid bought it at a thrift store. I don't know. I think maybe Shannon Rachel's daughter is now selling stuff, so it might even been a new one,
Yeah, I think I've seen that there's a BME shop now again on Instagram.
which is great, man. I love seeing those things resurrected.
Yeah.
It was a funny thing when Rachel was going to make an offer to Shannon for the to buy BME. The first financial, like where they had to kind of like look at whether this is a viable thing, said it was a cult of personality based on one person.
Hmm.
And Rachel's like, no, it's not. And they're like, it's literally your husband's tattoo on the logo.
Well, yeah.
So the first financier passed on giving her the loan to buy it because it was so cult of personality y. And I don't know, I still like, anytime I see that logo, it kind of does remind me. I got a message from Steve Hayworth the other day about the heart logo, and I sent him to you actually. I don't know if he ever got in touch. Uh,
For Steve?
yeah, so he asked me if I knew who created the glider heart logo,
Oh,
and I
there
was
were
like,
two different versions. When he passed away, like I drew a version that I thought would work really well, but there was also a version that people were making for like tattoos and stickers and shirts and stuff like that. So I remember there was actually kind of a weird, uncomfortable moment when the person who designed the other one was like, "Why did you draw one?" And I was like, "I don't know, because I wanted one, and I didn't know you already drew one."
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, if Steve gets in touch, that was me, because
Okay,
you were the first person I remember doing it, and I think somebody wanted an implant of it,
okay,
which is,
yeah, I could send him the file. I probably still have it somewhere.
it's a lasting testament to this guy who hasn't been with us for 11 years now, that there are people
Hmm.
that still want that image implanted and all that. And
Yeah.
you know he was pretty fun too. Not as fun as me, but he was still pretty fun.
Well, I'll wind it down here. Like I appreciate you saying yes because like I know in the past I asked you if you'd be interested and you said that podcasts weren't really your thing. So I appreciate you being open to it and that 2024 was your year of yeses because I think it probably made a really positive impact on people um, to see you at APP and BMX and stuff.
Well, yeah. So, and the people I've gotten to talk to this year for saying yes, like, man, when's the last time you and I sat down and had an hour-long conversation?
Yeah.
Orbax and Pepper, I haven't talked to those idiots in forever. So,
Hmm.
Matt Lauder and Tom from Beneath the Skin, like, if anything, it's actually encouraged me to be social. I don't care about the podcast part, man. It's good seeing your face.
Yeah, it's nice talking to you too because like um, as you go later in life and people go their separate ways, it's nice to kind of reconnect with people and being I look back at it very nostalgically. I know that there is like all kinds of stuff, rose-colored glasses and all that stuff, but I still look back on those years very, very fondly.
And I'm to the point now where maybe rose-colored glasses aren't a bad thing.
Hmm.
I mean, and this is a consistent point when I do podcasts, is I try to tamp down the negativity.
Yeah.
But that's just, that's obviously who I am as a dude. And it's like, oh man, well, I spent all this money and this person was an asshole. It's like, yeah, but man, we had some fun.
Hmm.
You're the chicken, man. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought I hallucinated you. For folks who are listening, it's 2004,
I think it was 2003.
2003. We're in Tweed, Ontario, a rural part of Ontario, for BME Fest, and it was the first time I had seen the legendary Klopex perform. Maybe it wasn't the first time. I don't know. Memory gets sketchy. And Sweet Pepper Klopek was dressed as Jesus. There might have been a gorilla.
Hmm.
And it was the first time. I was a pretty square kid. So even at this point in my 30s, I had never smoked weed before. and somebody got me to smoke opium laced hash and then drink absinthe.
Okay.
So I'm feeling it. I'm on this farm. We had just had one of the mod cons, I think, earlier that week,
Hmm.
maybe 3.5. I can't remember which order that one was. And we're out on this farm in Ontario, and the Klopeks are playing, and they're just creating mass destruction. And this rooster starts running around. And the next day, I brought up the rooster. I was like, "Nah, man, that wasn't part of the Klopek set. Like that wasn't a Klopek." So I thought for like a year that I had hallucinated, and it turned out
Yeah.
that we were the rooster all along.
Yeah, I don't remember why I had a chicken suit in my car, but I had a chicken suit in my car and I saw everybody else wearing costumes. And I just thought it would be funny to run around with a chicken costume on for a while. And
You
every now and
drove,
then people bring it up like it's this weird like BME Fest urban legend of like, I swear there was a chicken there, and be like, oh yeah, I heard that rumor too.
yeah, because you're the rooster.
Yeah,
That's all I'll say.
yeah. Well, if people want to the plug part, if people want to see more of your content, where would they go?
So I'm really bad at it now. Like we were talking at the beginning of this recording where I don't really understand technology anymore. Um, I like my Instagram, so you could find me at Sacred Debris or Occult Vibrations 23. I do tend to compartmentalize, so modification stuff would be Sacred Debris, tattoo stuff would be Occult Vibrations. Those are completely free. Please follow them. Like the stuff we post is really fun. You do get to see a different version of piercing and tattoo history than you're going to see a lot of online. If you feel like supporting us on Patreon, all that free stuff has to come from somewhere.
Hmm.
And the Patreon is what pays for me to get completely nerdy and buy negative scanners. So when I find negatives on eBay, I can put them on Instagram for free.
Yeah.
It's that's where we put most of the video. That's where we put most of the kind of more adult content stuff. You absolutely are going to find really fun stuff on the public stuff, but if you want the more, kind of regulated stuff that Mark Zuckerberg won't let us show, you go to sacreddebris.com, and
Mhm.
that's going to port you right over to the Patreon. Books, we do books. That's going to be nodalpointzine.com is where all of our
Mhm.
books are. That's my most fun stuff. Like I love the books more than I love anything. I love,
Yeah.
you've got that book there, and I dig that that's going to outlive you and I hope,
Yeah.
and
Well, I hope too.
I think about I think about all the stuff that I chase down on eBay, these books that are 30, 40 years old. And like, I think about, that's why I like personalizing books, is because it's like, I love getting a book that has a random personalization. You're like, this belonged to somebody, like this book had a life before me. And
Yeah.
you take those till photos, man, those were never intended to last more than, a couple of years. And you look at what's going down in Asheville, North Carolina, or Tampa with all the storms. Rachel Larott lost almost all of the BME video masters in a flood years ago.
Wow.
And every time you pick up one of those books, that decentralizes those incredibly rare images. So if God forbid anything were to happen to my photos of Till, every person who has that book is going to future proof his legacy and Jack's legacy. And when we do the Star Wars book next year, Ryan's legacy, and be able to talk about, years from now, some nerd's going to be on eBay like, man, I got that ModCon book, and that makes me pretty happy.
So, one last story is I had been talking to so first I messaged Phil, and it was kind of to try to get, in Blair's orbit because I wanted to maybe pick up some of his collection of stuff. Phil said that he had a bunch of books, PFIQs and all kinds of stuff that he wanted to, get to another home for archiving. And so I finally got up to Toronto, met up with Blair, and got some things from his collection. And one of them was the ModCon book, I Am the Strength of Art, and with the video CD in the back and all that stuff. And um, brought that right to Paul King at UKAPP for the archive. So it was kind of neat to be able to like have that in my hands and be able to see it and look at it and read it, because like I had never even been able to hold one of those things before because they were just so super rare.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. again, the idea. So there was a point where I don't know if there was an archive like ours before us.
Hmm.
Like we were certainly archiving this stuff when other people, it was just stuff. And you could just go into a store and buy these books. Not the
Right.
ModCon. Well, yeah, the ModCon did have a limited bookstore release, the second ModCon book. And now 30 years later, we hoard them like little goblins.
Mhm.
And I don't care whether somebody's sending their stuff to the Body Piercing Archive, whether they're sending their stuff to the Bishopsgate in the UK, whether I'm getting it. I think for me, it's just as long as 50, 100 years from now, somebody can pick up that book. I don't care who
Yeah.
has it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just want people to, and that's one of the things that makes it easy for guys like Paul and I, is we've amassed these big collections. So when you say, you ask me a question about somebody, I can just go to my library and be like, oh, that was that one PFIQ from 1981. I'm
Hmm.
doing an article right now on Madison Stone, she of the Madison piercing, and it helps to be able to go and find the first issue that they ever talked about the Madison piercing in. And with this stuff being a physical, tangible thing,
Yeah.
nerds like us can still go and
Uh,
pull it off the shelf and find the.
Lola, Lola had an idea. My partner, Lola Slider, had this idea in her mind to write a new industrial class. And she was like, "Oh, I want to look at more of the history of it and kind of tracing it back to like Eric Dakota, basically." And then finding out that one of the first like published mentions of an industrial piercing was in a body play, and I was like, I have that issue. And just
Yeah.
like being able to find it and open it up, and it's like talking about naming the rook, naming the doth, naming the industrial, and all those things. And it's just like so cool to just have that.
Yeah, and it's invaluable. And it's as we get further and further away from the mass availability of this stuff, the idea that people like myself, people like Paul, people like Matt Lauder are going to be bringing it back, even if it's just a snippet here, a snippet there, because there's going to come a time where, especially the rare, like PFIQ number 2, the rarer issues, you're not going to just be able to, access.
Yeah.
So maybe it's going to be Paul talking about something in PFIQ number 2, or Lola talking about something in that body play issue. As long as we keep the message going,
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you again so much for your time. Because, you know, people that create content, sometimes it's just like, I just don't want to do another fucking thing. So I appreciate you talking to me.
Well, I appreciate you asking. Obviously, it's because I said I'd say yes.
Yeah, when you said that in your speech, Lola just kind of gave me the Iggy. She was like, "You sure that's going to be on the podcast?" And I was like, "Okay."
Ultimately, I wouldn't have done it if I didn't want to chat with you. I would
Yeah,
have found an excuse to say that that was not a reasonable thing. So it was clearly just to see your smiling face. You smile a lot more than you did when I met you.
I have reasons to be happy now in my life. So, years of therapy and being in a romantic partnership changes you.
You were a moody little rascal when I met you.
I was. I had all kinds of unresolved depression issues, and now I have confronted depression issues, is a better way to phrase it.
Well, that's all
Yeah,
you can ask for, man.
yeah, yeah.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much for chatting
Cool.
with
All right. Well, have a good night. Bye
me.
bye.
Bye.